I will begin with an introduction for our esteemed guest, and we will launch immediately into the information we're here for. Towards the end of the event, we'll have a Q&A where all of your specific questions can be addressed. Dr. Chris Boleman has served as president and CEO of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo since May of 2020. Prior to that prestigious appointment, Dr. Boleman served in various leadership roles for the rodeo, including overseeing the rodeo's reorganization in 2019 and providing leadership for its mission-based programs, such as scholarships, grants, the Livestock Show, and other exhibits, and more. Dr. Boleman is a native Texan with a Bachelor of Science, a Master of Science, and a PhD from Texas A&M, where he has also taught. Dr. Boleman's been an active member of dozens of organizations related to leadership, youth development, and agriculture over his esteemed career. We are fortunate to have him with us today, lending his time and expertise. The rodeo has a huge impact on hotel occupancy in Houston, which is one of the major sources of arts funding for the city, of course. It is a grant maker and a supporter of culture, education, and more throughout the city. And of course, it is itself a major cultural event. So recently, when the rodeo announced new dates, shifting from its typical operations in March to May of 2021, our interest was piqued, and we asked Dr. Boleman to share with us the process that went into that major shift so that those of us in the arts and cultural community might learn from the rodeo's leadership. In light of the pandemic's impact on our health, our economy, and our social fabric, this is a remarkable show of leadership and a remarkable new strategy in a new day and age. So we've asked Dr. Boleman here to share with us how that process rolled out, how it led to this change, and the strategy they're currently using to manage it. So Dr. Boleman, thank you for being with us.
You bet. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Great introduction.
Oh, thanks. Well earned, well earned. So let's dive in. Dr. Boleman, would you share with us how the rodeo came to choose these new dates, what issues, which experts were a part of the process?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do so. And if it's okay, John, I want to backtrack just a minute and talk a little bit about what's going to happen in March, because we didn't give up on March. One of the things that as we work through, and I'll talk about scenarios in a few minutes, but really the premise for every decision that we have had, we've talked a lot about just focusing on the mission. What is the mission of the organization? And as you know, and most people know probably that we are a nonprofit. I mean, that's what we are. And of course, our mission is to promote agriculture by providing a family-friendly live entertainment experience that educates the public, supports Texas youth, and showcases Western heritage. Well, one of the biggest components to that is as in the name, is the Houston Livestock Show. And we have thousands upon thousands of young people across the state that had purchased livestock projects with the plan to come to a show in March. And a lot of those are age and date specific of ownership. So we felt like what we needed to do based on, as we started looking at our scenarios, is to hold that March date for those junior exhibitors. So one of the first announcements we made before we decided kind of the public piece was we need to make a commitment to the young people that would be coming here to participate. And so we ended up leaving that March event. So that March event will take place. We've got our safety plans in to the local officials now to evaluate. And that's our plan in our current COVID-19 atmosphere that we're living in. But we spread our dates for the shows out for the young people so that we can ensure we can meet the COVID-19 protocols and guidelines currently in place. So, again, that was really important to us from a mission point. From there, really what happened, and I get long-winded on this, John, so if you have to stop or yell at me to tell me to move it along, don't hesitate to do that. So in saying that, I want to make that point too, so let's look at May. What really happened for us is after I moved into this new role in May, which is a great time to come into a role, right? In the midst of all this. And let me just say, I'm so thankful for our volunteers and for our staff and our executive committee, because we have all tried to go about this in a very optimistic way since we shut down, or the show was shut down last March, as you might remember. So when we moved in May, or when I started in May, we immediately established a couple of task forces to look at just specifically the 2021 show. And so really there are three different groups that we put into place that cross-pollinated into the community. They weren't just a rodeo folks talking. One was a health and well-being task force, which was comprised of folks on staff, some of our volunteers that are in the medical and health industry, and then also local officials in the city and county office, along with some other experts to really help us determine where we're going to go. We also had a second task force that was more programming focused. What it looked at is if we're in some avenue or some area of different spacing and percentages that we could have, what would be our priorities? And then thirdly, a little bit later in the summer, we decided to add a community stakeholder group of really some of our local elected officials, and then also just community leaders that are thinking about not just about event management and standing up events and what that would look what that would look like for us. And we've used them as a listening group to bounce ideas off of and so forth. So that's where we started. And honestly, the Health and Wellbeing Task Force ended up being their task when we started was to think about March. But John, to be candid with you, what it really turned into is how are we going to do business even day to day? So they're very influential in us setting forth a path of how we're going to manage our office, how we're going to have meetings with volunteers. As we went through a very rough summer, then we saw it got a little better. And of course, now we're in another rough patch. And so so we started talking to them about just kind of day to day. And then with the programming task force, we started looking at these different options. So I must tell you, John, that I think I don't even know. I would hate to admit the number of total scenarios that we have surfaced that we've looked into. And so we narrowed it down to probably 6 or 7. And then what we decided to do is really wait and see what's going to happen and then be ready. Okay. And I would say that that's probably the best advice I can give to anybody standing up events. I talked to a friend of mine, a leadership expert, early on in this process of crisis leadership. And what he told me was it's a fool's errand to try and predict what it's going to look like. What you have to do is develop strategies. So when you know what it's going to look like, you're ready to implement. And so I thought that was very well said, and certainly something that I took to heart. And so from that, we developed a number of scenarios from limited seating, and a lot of those scenarios are still in play. But it became crystal clear to us in December. And we knew that we needed to make a decision in December, basically 60 to 75 days in front of our March event. We knew, and talking to our Health and Wellbeing Task Force, talking to the community stakeholder groups specifically, and then individual conversations with local experts in COVID-19, where we're heading, that March just wasn't going to be a good plan for a public event. And certainly there are COVID-19 processes in place. We know what those are. There's regulations. There's a lot of things that we could do in March, but we just felt like it was a safe move to not do something in public, particularly as the vaccine was starting to roll out. We're starting to see some things there. So what we decided to do instead was to see if there was an opportunity to look at different dates. And that really, John, for us, then started delving into, well, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our brand? I mean, we are certainly connected to March. People recognize us in March. If we start looking out, what does that mean? And again, through our collective kind of internal groups, and then working with our executive committee and working with our officer, our vice president team. And then, of course, there's 35,000 volunteers that make this thing happen. They sit on 109 committees. They all have chairmen. We went through a process that I like to call over communication, because I can't come up with a better term, to really seek some input. We've tried to be as transparent as we could be. And to see, hey, is this doable? Are you okay with looking at different dates? And overwhelmingly, what we heard internally, just from a work point of view and a staffing point of view, and from obviously the committee point of view, is this is important enough to our community that we should look. And then the second piece to that was, what does it mean for us as an organization? What's at risk for us? And that's probably another point 2, maybe, John, is really look at the domino effect of decisions that you're making. And I mean, we're learning on the fly on that. I mean, there's no blueprint for what we're all trying to do. In doing so, based on all those conversations, what we decided was it's worth taking a risk to look at days, postponing a decision, and looking at May. We had a lot of people say, oh man, the world is going to be fine by May because the rodeo is going to happen. And I want to be very clear that that's not the case. There are no guarantees here. It was just for us a much better opportunity when you compared it to March. And really, when you start getting into summer, you just start getting where you're over other activities that we didn't want to be over. For example, one of the things we did is we talked to a lot of our rodeo partners and made sure that was an okay move for May. And so, that's the kind of homework you have to do because we're all in this together. There's no right answer for any of this. And you just got to really sit and think about the unintended consequences, the domino effect, whatever terms you want to use to bear that down. And so in saying that, in summary, we thought May, because we feel this is a community event, as you mentioned, John. We know the economic impact of it. We know our partners and the supporters that we have, that it was worth looking into a later date, not making any confirmations or but just giving us time to again kind of play out these scenarios. I'll also say this: of all the scenarios we looked at, the one that probably we pushed to the back burner because we didn't want to think about it was a date change, because we are so connected to March. But we also said we have to keep every option open, and that's one of the things we've taken to heart here as a staff and as an organization is. While we don't know where we're going to finish, we think it's very important that we try to evaluate as many scenarios as we can. So that's one question you asked me, and 10 minutes later, I'm probably still talking. So I'll stop there, John, and see where we are.
That's great. That's why we're here. I want to reiterate, I was jotting down some of the things I think that our constituents who are listening today might want to take away from this. So we can sort of highlight a couple of things you pointed out, right? Looking at your mission, looking at your values, using that as a lens to make a decision about rescheduling or rebuilding or standing up new or different or the same events. And that's really important. It also goes back to why we exist, what our purpose is, and what we want our impact to be. So I think that's a valuable principle we can take away from that. I think your idea of doing multiple scenario planning and having them ready to launch when it's time to launch is another sort of operating practice that we could borrow from you. I think understanding what your priorities are, right? So articulating and ranking what our priorities for action or impact are is another very powerful thing. And then finally, and there's a lot more we could pull out, but something that I think is quite important is connecting with your constituents to listen deeply to what they want and what they want to see from you. Whether it's your partners in executing the event, right? You didn't want to run roughshod over their summer events, for example. Or whether it's the volunteers that are help driving it, or whether it's the community members that want to attend and benefit from it and just enjoy the event. So I think that kind of open communication must also be helpful, not just for standing up a new event or a different event or the same events, but for building and maintaining the relationships you have with all of those different stakeholder groups, right? People feel respected and listened to when you ask. What are some of the strategic actual or tactical methods you use to talk to all these different stakeholder groups? You have such a large group of them, many different types, and many of them in each type. So what kind of methods did you use to ask and listen?
Sure. For sure. I think it's a lot about to start with a foundation of communication is easier when you have great relationships with folks. And I was going to circle back to that and say that another piece to this communication is, and it's tied to what we just mentioned, but I'll drill down a little bit more, is you don't have all the answers. I mean, there's not one of us that knows. And so the more that you can vet ideas and depend on experts within their field, and even though that may be narrow, but when you put all the narrow expertise fields together, then you can make your best decision. We made a decision early on that this over communication plan. The one good thing is we were still able to meet via this technology. We immediately pivoted to online meetings and just tried our best to provide strategies for open communication. One of my big phrases is disagreement doesn't mean dislike. And because there's no way that we're all going to agree on what to do in this scenario. What we know here is that we know how to run a 20-day event in March, and we've done very well with that over time. So one of the things that we admitted up front as a part of this communication strategy is it's okay that we don't know. It's okay that we're uncomfortable. It's okay that we don't have all the answers, because you have to go in with that mentality. It's not the typical plan. But what we did is a commitment to communicating with staff, much like I'm sure you, John, is, a lot of staff aren't in the building, or for a time they weren't. They were working from, and so we're very strategic about town hall meetings that also included our volunteer leadership. What we didn't want to do with this organization, as we're planning and operating for an event, that we have a staff group meeting and then we have volunteers here, but we wanted to cross-pollinate that. So even though we have monthly meetings with our volunteer leadership, we did more. We've been more purposeful at providing updates, seeking input. We've asked our stakeholders and our clientele about, if this happens, what are your thoughts? And if we have to have a limited show, if we have to socially distant. And what you learn from there is kind of what I've continued to say is, you're not going to get a consensus, but at least you're going to get some feedback. And with that feedback, you're able to make better decisions. Another thing that we did as a part of that is, and that I haven't mentioned, is we talked to other folks around the country that are like us. We've reached out to Calgary and Denver and Louisville and the North American, and Kansas City, the American Roll, and our friends in San Antonio. And we've been able to share those ideas, and we made a commitment, all of us collectively, that it was okay to communicate that with our own individual teams. We're all in this together. And it's actually made, I think, our organization, the Rodeo family, even stronger. And even then, what you'll see is not everybody doing the same thing, because so much of it is based on your local organization and the process, the COVID-19 policies that are in place as well. And that's another point, I think, to all this, is that every single organization, every one of you that are on, you have to do what's best for your organization based on the time frame you're in and the community that you're in. And so one of the questions I've heard a lot is, well, how come this rodeo is doing this, and how come you're not doing this? Or how come y'all haven't considered this? Or why did you move your dates, but they didn't? Well, it's really all about the individual strategy that you have in place, but you can take from these other organizations and learn and see to come up with some ideas as well. So in summary, I mean, we have just been, a matter of fact, after this, we have a call with our executive committee to just try to share the information as best we can and as fully as we can via email, Zoom. There have been some face-to-face here with distancing that's happening. And all that being said, with one thing that we started with, which is we have to do what's right from a health and safety point of view. And to me, a lot of what we wrestle with internally is trying to do something for the community, like the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, or some arts activity that we know is important. And we're so passionate about it because it's our mission, back to mission and purpose, but it's balancing that with what's safe, and for us to be able to implement and to ensure that our audience feels safe about participating in whatever way that may be.
That's great. Thanks, Dr. Boleman. So let me circle back slightly to something you said. I will say something I love is that the way that our strategies and our response and our actions might vary by our organization, by our place, and by our purpose. And that's valuable to remember. As is the phrase, "It's okay, we do not know the answer." That is a tattoo I might get on my arm after this year. So thank you for that, Victim. I will, let me circle back to something you said earlier. When you talked about the task forces and the strategy setting that you had, what were can you list for us some of the areas of expertise that were particularly valuable to have in the mix there? You said there was quite a diversity of them.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the health and well-being task force is probably a bit more straightforward. On that group, we called upon expertise within the medical center here in downtown Houston. We have some friends there that were willing to provide us with COVID-19 updates and what's happening in the community. Because the thing about COVID-19 too is it seems to be up and down in certain communities and certain places at different times. And so we've worked with them a lot just on predictor models and what we thought January was going to look like. And we knew that January would be a very tough time, which we're currently in. So we did that. We also had some event folks as well. Some of the folks here, even at NRG Park, because we are on at NRG Park. This is a facility that we sit in with the Texans. So the Texans were involved in that. As a matter of fact, there's even some bigger groups of events in Houston that get together and facilities from the Houston Rockets to the Astros. That's another piece of this as well. And so, but on the Health and Wellbeing Task Force, back to that one. So a lot of medical expertise, a lot of local city and county folks, or representation from the mayor's office, representation from the county judge's office. And a lot of that, not only for their health expertise, but just so they kind of know what we're thinking. So we're not dropping surprises on people. We didn't want to do that. And then some event experts, and then just a couple of logistics folks that as we started drilling down into things, what operationally could happen. The programming task force was more of an internal group of volunteers and staff that were looking at, and what we did there, John, is we looked at the COVID-19 social distancing guidelines. And so they went about it from, well, does outside look different than an inside presentation because of COVID-19 protocol? If it's 50% in March, this is things we're talking about in the summer. If it's 50% occupancy outside, what does that mean in terms of what we provide to the community, from the carnival to the food booths? How are we going to handle distribution of food? You know, all those just very, very operational and tactical. And so we did those two, definitely were the two in play. And then we added the community stakeholder group, which was a little bit of a cross-pollination of the two, because what we felt like we were missing is just community leadership expertise and what's going on in Houston. That's less about the health and well-being and more about event management and what's being stood up and really how that's going. And we use them a lot to bounce off, you know, if we move to May, what do you think? How do you think the community would respond to that? And so I think each group, and I may be a little off, but probably had somewhere between 10 and 15 people on it. And just to help guide us. And the other point the community stakeholder group did for us, and the Health and Wellbeing Task Force specifically, even more than just meeting monthly, so to speak, we opened an avenue to have one-on-one conversation. We didn't wait for a meeting to get some expertise. So I would make an individual call and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. We're going to talk about this. What do you think? And so that allowed us to move a little faster and be a bit more nimble. And at the same time, as a part of the stakeholder group, we also had some representation of just some of the folks that are impacted by our organization the most, whether it be vendors, whether it be just where we are on site and so forth.
Thank you. So let me ask now, today, after selecting the division of activities between March and May, and you're you've got this strategy in action. How are you managing the strategy now? I think there's kind of two components. One is, how do you take kind of this finely oiled machine and then change it, so that it's on a different timeline than it was. And the second is, how are you managing and keeping an eye on the kinds of things that might force you to pivot yet again or change another plan, or, you know what I mean? Like, how are you monitoring your current plan for the kinds of changes that this pandemic environment, since it's similar to what it was a month ago, how are you monitoring it for potential changes going forward?
Well, what I do, John, is I just don't sleep. So that helps. There
you go. Strategy, leadership.
I think one is just setting a foundation that anything is movable at any time. Everything has to be, the hardest part to this is we're so used to moving in a straight line, and it's really setting the expectation of, we're just not going to do that this year. And you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. So where we are today, when we right before the holiday Christmas break, I told our team, let's shut the book and let's just go and kind of take a breath, and then we'll come back in January and let's see where we are. Not so much associated with COVID-19, but let's just see now that we have some time to kind of clear some cobwebs and get some rest, let's kind of just check in on where we are internally as an organization. So that's kind of where we started, and that's where we are now. And meeting with our officer team last week, meeting with our executive committee later today, and our staff as well, a staff call this week of just saying, okay, we have this May plan. And John, where we really are is we're back to those same scenarios, but we're just becoming probably, I would say, more narrow. And you know, we did this huge brainstorming. I like to talk with my hands. So we start here with all these options, and then based on the information that we continue to receive, and based on information receiving from health experts, you can kind of see where we end up, you know, how that narrows to a couple of options, and you just have to be okay with it. One of the things I say is, so many people are focused on, well, who's making the decision? And to me, it's a what that's making a decision. COVID-19 is going to make the decision for us, and then we will implement what we can because of it. And so to me, so the critical points are continuing to highlight that we still don't know for sure what that end product's going to look like, and we have to be open to that. So we got to keep working the scenarios. And as I've said a lot, I mean, I feel it's our job to come up with as many things as we can. And then obviously, you know, one thing I haven't talked about is it financially feasible to do some of it? You know, I mean, there's obviously a huge economic impact to this as well. And then secondly, in terms of monitoring the situation, that's just a day-to-day. I mean, it really is. We have a number of folks that provide us, me, and our chairman of the board, Mr. Caruth. We get some updates about what's happening, what the trajectory is. We stay in constant communication with our partners, with the city and county and the state, for that matter. And so it is what the other term I use a lot is, sorry, I'm using, is that this is the work. In 2021, looking and monitoring COVID-19 and seeing what's happening is the work at the moment. We have to do that.
And when you say monitoring, let's dive in a little bit, because I think there's also a couple questions related to this. Are there metrics or specific elements, like somebody listed out testing, positivity rate, vaccination numbers? Like, are there certain things that the rodeo has assessed, like these are some really critical numbers and we look at them every day or every week?
Yeah, so I'd say all the above we look at every day. Do we have a number that says if it's this, we want to do this? Not so much. I mean, we rely heavily on what the city's health department is telling us, what the county health department is telling us. Of course, we're watching how the vaccinations are rolling out and what that could mean. And that's what I mean by a lot is really what COVID-19 is telling us. There are already things in place. We know that with the current process, we've backed, if I'm not mistaken, to 50% in restaurants. And so we just monitor all of that. We've talked a lot about, and we've learned a lot. We sit on a lot of calls of the infection rate number is at this level. We look at where the county is in terms of the 1 to 5 or the color code that they have from green to red. All of that, and we don't set internal parameters. We're just watching it and working through our relationships with those folks to see where we are. They are doing it every day. We're still trying to figure out, you know, how we're going to have a show, and we certainly rely on that expertise, as well as internally. We have some volunteers that are in this community. They're in the medical community, and they too can help to provide us with others for meetings and get us insight from different folks. So, but no, we don't have, you know, if we hit here, we're doing this or that. We will follow what's in place in the community.
Right. So part of it's just following public health guidelines, and then part of it's just monitoring what's going on. And it sounds like you've got a program team that is redesigning all the aspects of this thing in response to public health guidelines and other kind of measurements that y'all are looking at. Let me ask this. So I know that, you know, a year ago, somebody asked a question about last year at the rodeo. And I know for me, when the rodeo shut down and there was a moment of community spread, I know this was before your tenure as president and CEO. That was a moment where it hit me about the impact of COVID and what it was going to be, right? There was a rubber hits the road moment when if that happened at the rodeo and the rodeo shut down, I think for a lot of us in the community, that was big news, and it was news, right? And so tell us a little bit about what you learned from that, what the rodeo as an institution kind of learned from that. I mean, it's got to be, I think, a core idea of like, this can't happen again, or this isn't how this is going to work again, right? So there's also like, y'all are in an interesting position where COVID hit it hit America while the rodeo was taking place. And it was a big deal for Houston to kind of lose that second half of the rodeo, right, for a few weeks. So what kind of things has your team learned from that moment going forward that you're taking into this planning process?
Yeah, there's no question we did a deep dive right after that. And we have been talking about and implementing crisis communication plans for really the previous 2 years. I've been at the show for 4. And so it provided us an opportunity to really evaluate what we had in place from a communication point of view and how we would make changes if it happened again. And John, you're right. We don't, the whole point would be to prevent that from happening. There was no way to predict it. As Joel, Mr. Calley would have said, and I will iterate as well, we were in the process of meeting with all the health officials at that point and following, what was in place at the time. And so whenever you go into crisis mode in terms of, and I mean crisis of a shutdown of getting everybody, all the puzzle pieces together to then disband, there was a lot. And I think what we learned more than anything is how many partners it impacted. We have so many vendors. We're all one big family. I think what we learned from it is that there's obviously strong community support for us, and people jumped in right away to help us make that change. And so in saying that, what we've learned from it and what we have moving forward, I think is really a testament of what we've put into place regarding constant communication with the experts in these fields and with the local and county and state officials so that we can make the best decisions. And all of us are a part of the decision-making process, if that makes sense. And so by bouncing ideas off, bouncing different examples and scenarios, we're able to better predict, if that's the right term, in a time where you can't predict, but to better assess what would happen if this happened. And so, just kind of case study development and looking at, if we did this, what does this mean here? If we have to make this decision here, that's why, John, for us, I think making the call in advance, for the May event, so that we don't get into a position as you're describing, I think is really a critical learning piece too.
Gotcha. Cynthia asks a great question that I think a lot of us wonder about generally, which is, if folks show up, let's say you have mask rules in place and folks show up without them, what kind of things are you doing to prepare for those sorts of interactions between your team or your volunteers and individuals who really may feel passionately about not wearing a mask despite safety guidelines or policies and rules about it?
Yeah, I think that's a question we've pondered a lot, and for us it's not political, and I think we have, again, all events and activities are having to go through a review process of how they're going to manage their event and activity. And for us, it's going to be about what we get to be able to do, so to speak, if I'm saying that the correct way. And if masks are what it takes, I feel strongly that we will do what we need to do. We have talked with a number of events that have happened, like our partners at the Texans, and how they managed a mask. We have talked about providing masks. But if that's where we are, then we've had actually, as you've seen, probably a mask up campaign. We rely on the experts, okay, and we rely on the science to tell us what we need to do, and we're going to follow that. And do we know people aren't some don't believe it's important while others do, and yes, the answer to that is we understand that, but we have to do what's best to create that safe environment. And one thing that about the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo is we do believe it is a place where people can come together. It is a place of unity, and so if that's the call, then certainly that's what we'll do. Just like we will do social distancing, just like we'll wash our hands, just like all the other that are in place.
Great question from one of the audience members about ticketing. I know that, cancellations and refunds last spring when this first hit the performing arts around the country, there was a lot of dialogue about how do you cancel? How do you cancel compassionately? What about the artist? What about the audience? What about the financial model for a lot of theaters in particular? For example, it's razor thin margins. It's really tough stuff. Financial management is a tricky thing. So tell us how the rodeo is thinking about potential requests for refunds, or what happens if May doesn't go forward. How's that policy developing?
Sure. I think certainly each organization has its own processes and its own background in place. And luckily for us, is that we have had obviously great success over the years, and specifically as we think about giving back. And that's why, before I get to that question, that's why it's really important to point out it's tied to the financial piece, that we were able to make our commitment to scholarships for 2021 and do those things that we've always done. But in terms of refunds and handling that, certainly I think what we've seen a lot of organizations do is one, offer up the chance to roll over, to roll those funds into the next season, which a lot of folks here at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo did when we lost certain days of our show last year. And even in our move to May, we've had a few people request that. We've had a few people request refunds. And so we work with individuals one by one on what's best for them and what they want to do. And we'll just continue to do that. Again, without knowing where we're going to end up, the thing I would say is that we're really focused on a rollover or a refund type policy.
Gotcha. Another question came in. How have the safety protocols you're implementing impacted your budget, right? Have you had to reallocate a bunch of money towards some new things? What are those things, and how expensive is it looking?
Yeah, and so we actually have we decided to set up a special code for PPE, and as a part of that, we are monitoring that as we go. So I don't know that I have an answer until we get to the end, but there's no question we've budgeted quite a bit more for hand sanitation. We're going to be doing much more cleaning, between events or during the day, and whatever the case may be. Mask, whatever is in place, we feel like that's a good place for us to allocate dollars and resources to, because that's the key point to this. We don't want this to be a super spreader. We have to do our part, and if that means we ramp up in terms of equipment and resources, then that is the decision we have made. We are not going to sacrifice dollars in that area. And so we'll balance that in some other areas potentially, but it is critically important. And it's not just about hand sanitation and cleaning things up. It's also about how we distribute a food product when it's purchased, and how they get it in a safe way. I mean, and so we know how corn dogs are given here, and funnel cakes, and we know all those great foods. And so we've had to look at, okay, is that the right strategy for us? How do you handle the condiments from mustard to ketchup? I mean, all of that is a part of our plan, and where we are investing to ensure that we stay as safe as possible.
And maybe the question came in related, like a cashless interaction, right? So there isn't.
And so we made the announcement, but we will do electronic tickets, for example, and normally we have some sort of combination with that. So yes, all of that is a part of our new world that we're living in, no doubt.
Gotcha. So another question came in, and if you've got any advice in this domain, like for those of us that operate smaller shops than the rodeo, do you have any thoughts on how we might access some of the expertise that you were able to access?
Well, I really believe you just have to ask, because the one thing I have learned through all of this in working with folks in the medical field specifically is how badly that they want things to happen in a safe way, how passionate they are about it, and really anything that you're doing and that you're standing up. I think you're going to get the support that you need. Now, obviously, these guys are overwhelmed at the moment, and we want to give them their time and their space. But what we hear a lot is the safer we can do things, then then hopefully the safer we keep people and the less people will end up in a bad situation in a hospital and so forth. But I have been not surprised at all, but we have been overwhelmed with the support, and the same from the city and the same from the county health departments. They have been awesome. They've taken every call. They've found time. We've got cell phone numbers of folks that anytime we need something to reach out. I don't know that it's the size of the event. Ours is one event, 20 days, and people recognize it. I get it. It's big. And so, but I think it's any organization. I would lean hard on your executive committee, some of the folks within your own volunteer ranks that probably have relationships and contacts with folks. That's what's probably helped us the most is we have somebody that knows somebody that can put things together. And so, for example, I'll use this as an example. We had somebody reach out to us through the city. The city then contacted us. And so we sent some volunteers last weekend down to help with the vaccination that was happening at Minute Maid. And so that's what I mean. It's all about relationships, and every one of your organizations, I mean, all the important Houston Arts, the Heart Alliance, and everybody that you work with are all, the thing about Houston and Houstonians is that we feel this calling to give. That's through our time, our talent, our treasures, whatever the case may be. And there's no time like now where we need that. And so I think I think most organizations, if not all, I should just say all organizations, will be pleasantly pleased with the response they would get from local experts.
Yeah, I will echo that. I think that's brilliant. Just ask around and figure it out. Houstonians are pretty generous. I will say we're doing a series of these conversations, and one of the next ones will be one on vaccines. And we were poking around trying to find somebody, and ultimately were incredibly generously introduced to a local international vaccine specialist. So I'm pretty psyched about that, and folks can stay tuned for that event. But I think I want to echo what you said, our boards, networking, our friends, et cetera, and we got there. So yeah, that's proof positive of something you just said. Are there any attractions or events that people will be enjoying remotely hosted by the rodeo?
Well, so currently we've definitely been meeting virtually. We've had some virtual programs. Our Black Heritage Committee is going to have a virtual gala coming up. And so as it relates to the May event, well, let me back up. For the March event, you are able to watch the young people exhibit their livestock projects on our website. Right. We'll have that streaming for all the kids. But at the same time, for the May event, as I mentioned, a number of scenarios. Certainly one of the scenarios are there virtual opportunities? We've seen, obviously, many organizations do that. And so, yes, I do believe there will be some virtual things that are happening as we see where we land.
Great. Okay, great. We'll stay tuned for those. There was one question a little further back. If it sort of loops back to your over communication idea, but what are some ways what do you feel led to the fact that you've maintained the buy-in of these hundreds, or if not thousands, of people and partners who make up the rodeo ultimately? Like what led to their being willing to come along with you in these sorts of changes and maintain their roles as volunteers or staff or partners or whatever it is? So the question was about buy-in. Like, how did your leadership, how did your practice result in ongoing or even increased buy-in?
Yeah, I think part of it was seeking their input at times along the way. You can't get to everybody, but certainly as we work with committee chairmen and talk to the local folks that have some interest in what we do. But in saying all that, to me, it's two things. One is it is the passion of our 35,000 volunteers that just they believe so strong in what we do that. We are all in this together, and we all recognize that this is such a unique year, and that I think we're growing more used to. We don't know, but we're here to help, me included. So I think that, and then secondly, the one thing I noticed, and one thing I said when we announced our May plan, is just how important this event is to the community. And that in a time where there's a lot of unknowns and frankly, a great deal of sadness, this is a very, very tough time. I'm a big believer in hope. And I think this community is hopeful. because again, what I was scared to death when we announced the May plan on what the reaction would be. And of course, there's always naysayers, but overwhelmingly, it was, this is our event. This is a community event. This is us. This is what we do. And if that provides hope for us to do what we do and come together, instead of a felt hat in March, it may be a straw hat in May, but sign me up. And so and I'm not just talking volunteers, I'm just talking about community, patrons, customers, supporters, there's so much pride in this community and surrounding areas with the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And I think you put those two variables in the equation, it's pretty tough to beat.
Yeah, that's an inspiring perspective.
Yeah.
Like, it's important, I think, to keep our attention in a very difficult moment on something that keeps us going and something that inspires us to keep moving forward. Thank you for that. Folks, if you've got any more questions, please paste them in the chat and we'll address them to our best ability. Dr. Boleman, let's pivot a little bit to the personal. So you have a big leadership role in town. You have an important job. You never sleep. You're working constantly, I'm sure. How have you managed personally and sustained your own leadership, the demands on you for leadership and decision-making through a really difficult time? I mean, economically, socially, psychologically, all these things. How do you do that?
Sure. Well, the first way to do it is make sure we utilize the people around us. And frankly, I use the word we and us. It's not just me. We have a great staff. We've got a great set of officers, vice presidents. We've got a great executive committee that has just been invaluable, and their phone calls and support and me communicating, or if I have a question, their openness to say, to me and to our team, to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or I need some advice here. You cannot go at these kinds of things alone. You will not be successful. So it's a we. I'm a big believer that the knowledge is in the room, not in the front of the room. And so we have to utilize all the strengths that each one of us bring to the table. We've got some great ideas from folks from all up and down and around the organization, so to speak. And so I think having that level of trust in each other, number one. Two is just an overwhelming sense of transparency. At times, maybe over transparent for me, but I just really believe in the candidness of what we're facing, approaching it with as much. To me, everybody that has as much information as they can, that's what it takes to make the best decisions. And so certainly there's that. And thirdly, I run 3 miles every single day, no matter what. And so I'm addicted to running, but it's less physical. It is more mental. It allows me to free up some personal space and time. And it's just what I do to release, but that's the least important. The most important is, just like you, John, you just can't go at this alone. And if you feel yourself in a box all alone, I would argue you're not doing it right. That's why you have to lean on the folks around you, for sure.
Thank you. Dr. Boleman, I will say you lending us your time and expertise today certainly makes me feel less alone in wrestling with a lot of these problems. So my thanks to you. We've answered I think, all of the questions that have come in. So we will let everyone go. My name is John Abadili. I'm the CEO of the Houston Arts Alliance. Dr. Chris Boleman, President and CEO of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, has been with us for the last hour or so. Thank you, sir. Yeah, last remarks.
I just want to tell everybody to continue to stay safe out there. Obviously, we're in a tough time in Houston right now, but as these vaccines are coming out, let's not forget to do what we can. Our hashtag stay safe for rodeo, but just stay safe for each other. It's the right thing to do. And prayers and thoughts with everybody out there, those frontline workers that are doing all they can do. And so hopefully we will get through this. I'll close with the only way out is through, and we will get through this, but let's keep each other close, even if it's not physically, in our thoughts and our hearts, and we will come through the other side of this. Thanks for having me, John. Thanks to you and your
fabulous. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your words. This video will be posted on our YouTube page today or tomorrow. So folks, if you want to review it or share it, please find it there. Dr. Boleman, have a great week. Good luck with the rodeo. And thank you everybody for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.